So I'm not sure I'm a user or a provider of entanglement. I guess representing IonQ, we're a little bit of both. And I want to tell you what I mean by that, and also concentrate on the optical nature of the quantum computers we're building at IonQ. So this here is a picture of exactly 80 ytterbium ions, individual atoms. They're glowing because we're shining laser light on them, of course, and collecting their fluorescence. They're trapped on they're levitated on the chip below there, which was made by Sandia National Labs. They have a very big ion trap and quantum information group. And we use these chips. We've built our own as well. They're in a vacuum chamber, and I don't want to talk too much about quantum computing, except to note that our eyes and ears on these qubits are classical optical sources, lasers, modulators, and so forth. And we have individual laser beams that are poking on these atoms. And so in a sense, we're generating entanglement by moving the atoms. They feel each other. I won't get into the details there, but the important point is that this is all of the optics is classical. There's nothing quantum about that. The entirety of the quantumness is are in the atoms themselves. They are perfectly replicable because they're each atomic clocks of the same element, same isotope. So we don't worry about manufacturing qubits. They are already manufactured and they're perfect, meaning they have no idle errors. When you leave them alone, they last as long as you want because they're atomic clocks. Of course, our decoherence is limited by reducing by the noise of the classical sources, and that's really the issue at hand. IonQ is a startup that formed a few years ago. Jungsang Kim and I co-founded this in 2015. Jungsang Kim at Duke and me from the University of Maryland. And again, we make quantum computers, but I would say we don't really build anything. We just integrate things. We buy stuff from like Thor Labs, from like Harris, and we use Sandia chips. This is an example of one of our own chips, actually made out of quartz. And we're notably going to become a public company very soon. So we'll have a bank account to be able to explore in many different directions on the scale-up issue. So it's easy to add atoms. That's not the problem, especially because they're identical. So unlike any other platform, we don't worry about manufacturing inhomogeneities as we scale up. The scale up is hampered by a control issue. If you look at our technology 5 years ago, here's a university lab. That doesn't look like a computer. It certainly doesn't look like it scales. But in fact, like all optical systems, if you know what you're doing, you freeze it and you manufacture it. And because it gets smaller, it actually performs better. So we're well on our way to making very small ion trap chambers and quantum computer modules. This is from Jungsang Kim's lab at Duke in a collaboration with Cold Quanta, also an active QED-C member, where they've actually made the vacuum seal right on the chip itself, the standard chip for holding these. We're working vigorously at IonQ to integrate optics on the chips, the classical optics, but I want to talk for the last 30 seconds or so on this vision, scaling up our quantum computer in a modular fashion by making optical interconnects between chips. We feel strongly that any scalable quantum computer is going to have to be modular. That's a very hard statement to prove, but I think our experience is anything that's complex, like airline routes or classical CPUs, they have to be modular to scale. We don't see football field sizes of Pentium chips, for instance. So fortunately, with these trapped ion qubits, they're all identical. They produce single photons. They're optically active, and these single photons are exactly the same wavelength, exactly the same bandwidth, so we don't worry about mismatches. They don't exist with these atoms. We do worry about speed, and the speed at which we can link two quantum processing units, say rack-mounted individual chips here, is limited by the heralding rate. It's asynchronous, but with memory, with extra qubits, we can make it synchronous and a little faster. And Mark recognized this optical switch. It's going to be a central nervous system of a modular architecture to scale. And I guess the big picture here is, well, there's a picture of Jungsang Kim standing next to the biggest optical switch ever built that he had a big part in at Bell Labs about 20 years ago. But I guess the take-home point here is that there are no wires between these qubits. It's all optical, either classical or these photons. Everything is controlled by software. The configuration of the optical switch tells you what your network graph looks like. The entanglement within qubits in a single QPU is all in software. So this is a totally reconfigurable system to do error correction on the fly, to be tailored to any algorithm you want. So there's a lot to be gained in the upper levels of the software stack in this particular hardware. And my last slide is a little bit of a catch-all, but I show this one a lot. I think quantum computing is the hardest and probably most important quantum application that has the most promise in a sense. But a quantum simulator is just a specific purpose quantum computer, so there are going to be great overlaps there. But one thing that's maybe not appreciated is that quantum computing and quantum communication are exactly the same thing to scale. If you build a big quantum computer, you are making a quantum computer network. I think some of the previous speakers here have accented that as well. You have to make it modularly, and optical photons are probably the way to do it. Conversely, if you're going to make a large-scale quantum communication system, you're going to need quantum repeaters, which are nothing more than small quantum computers. So having the protocols to interface matter qubits, memory, with photons, it was really done first with atomic ions, maybe 15 years ago. And I think the protocols will be developed in this platform to make big computers. And eventually, when we get to telecom wavelengths, maybe we can go large distances. Quantum sensing, of course, is related to all of these things, but maybe in a little bit different way. I think distributed sensors will be entangled to beat the shot noise limit. They may involve interesting entangled states that may be produced by a quantum simulator or a quantum computer.
So are you saying that quantum computers, when they actually become reality, assuming they become reality and useful and pass quantum supremacy and they're used every day, are they going to require entanglement to be connected together to scale, in your opinion?
Yeah, I guess it is my opinion. In principle, you can do it with one big chip, but the problem with quantum systems, this is another non-theory, is that as you make a quantum system bigger and bigger, it becomes less and less quantum. So I think this is, of course, what we experience in everyday life, any complex system. You have to sort of stop, and you do limit connectivity to a certain extent when you do that, but at least you can grow the system. So indeed, quantum computers will get useful when we have hundreds of adept qubits, and that means qubits that have error rates less than 1/10%, 100%. And that probably means error correction. It means a lot more qubits. It means you have to network them to keep error rates low. So yes, I guess the short answer is yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hi, Chris. I have a quick question. So to scale this ytterbium computer, would you need this routing hardware and the memory at 369 nanometer?
Oh, ytterbium, yes. 369 nanometers is sort of the working wavelength. There are other ions, calcium's in the blue, barium is in the green. So there's a nice, this is very technical, but ytterbium has a very clean atomic structure. It makes it very easy to use. These other ions, it's a little less clean, but not exactly. There's, for instance, a radioactive isotope of barium that is as good as ytterbium, but it's visible. Of course, they're radioactive. Good news is we don't need that many atoms. So I think in the future, we're going to move away from the UV. Thank you for the question. I hate the UV. I've been using it all my life. I think going into the barium system in particular, we're going to be able to use green optics. Telecom's another thing. I think we're going to have to wait for technology, maybe single photon wavelength conversion to be able to hit telecom wavelengths. But good point. You need to go visible.
Thank you.